And welcome back, folks, to Truth versus News for the second hour here on May 6th with Scott Bennett and James Betcher. We're telling it like it is. Stay tuned and take good notes. Go ahead, Jim. What we got next?
Thank you, Don. We have, so it begins, Moscow's granting Russian citizenship to inhabitants of the East Ukraine rubble areas, the republics there. This is the eventual outcome of the Victoria Nuland-inspired disruption of Ukraine, driving the democratically elected president of Ukraine out to the tune of $5 billion American taxpayer dollars, with the complicity of George Soros throwing in another $500,000 of his own. It's outrageous, but the pendulum has swung. There's a lot going on here. It's very much, in my opinion, favoring Russia, that Ukraine's going to be very much, for the most part, realigned with Russia. This is one of multiple developments that are taking place in that region, where I would say that the inspiration of Zbigniew Brzezinski from his great chessboard, that if you could pry Ukraine off of Russia, it would greatly weaken the bear, was tried and has failed. Meanwhile, North Korea is warning of undesired consequences if the U.S. doesn't change its stance. Elaborating on previous calls from Kim Jong-un to show more flexibility, Vice Foreign Minister Cho Sun-hui said the U.S. was risking unintended consequences if it doesn't change its position on denuclearization, and one more palatable both sides. Clone mentioned Mike Pompeo's threat to change paths if North Korea doesn't give the U.S. everything it wants, saying that changing paths isn't an option that only the United States has, and that North Korea could also make that decision. She further said the North Koreans remain determined to get rid of their nuclear arsenal, but U.S. comments and positions are forcing them to hesitate. After the Hanoi summit, the U.S. indicated denuclearization meant to them North Korea would give the U.S. its nuclear arms. North Korea is keen for a deal where dismantling the arms and the infrastructure is enough, and in return, the U.S. both allows a peace treaty with South Korea and starts letting UN sanctions be lifted. U.S. officials are ruling out either until North Korea gives them everything they want, which officials say could take several years. Sounds to me like an absurd scheme. Meanwhile, we have Israel granting the first Golan Heights oil drilling license to a Dick Cheney-linked oil company. Surprise, surprise. This is part and parcel of Donald Trump giving away the Palestinian store to the Israeli merchants. It's completely outrageous. First, he gives them Jerusalem, then he gives them the Golan Heights, then he declares the Revolutionary Guards of Iran to be a terrorist group. This is so insulting, it's unbelievable. And of course, because the Golan Heights turns out to be loaded with oil and gas, after declaring it also belongs to Israel, Israel is turning around and giving out the first oil drilling license in the Golan Heights to a company linked to former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney. War is a racket, as Smedley Butler reminded us. Since the outbreak of the conflict in Syria, Israel has awarded drilling rights for oil and gas in Israeli-occupied Syria. Let me emphasize, this is in Israeli-occupied Syria. They're giving out oil drilling rights to a part of Syria that the international community recognizes as a part of Syria. Only Donald Trump is the exception. Guess who's on the board of the Genie Energy? Dick Cheney, Jacob Rothschild, Rupert Murdoch, James Woolsey, Bill Richardson, Larry Summers, Michael Steinhardt. Embarrassingly bad. Nothing new here. War is a racket, as Smedley Butler reminded us. He spent his entire career as a Marine Corps general conducting military operations to enhance the profit margins of then international, now multinational corporations. Scott, it's embarrassingly bad.
Yeah, that should be a war crime. That should be immediately diplomatically exposed in the United Nations Security Council. There should be sanctions from all countries around this Genie Energy pirate that has gone into the Syrian-owned Golan Heights, which Israel claimed to own in 1967 during the 67 war, but the UN had voted against it in the 80s, and the Israelis never removed themselves from it. And now they are actively hijacking and pirating these sections for oil and mineral resource exploitation. And that the only options you have is to fight fire with fire. You either destroy all of the energy activities that are being perpetrated through the theft of Genie Energy in this area, or you diplomatically destroy them and sanction them and stop them. But the absence of that knowledge exposes that the U.S. media, of course, is completely hypocritical. And this is really what the racket's all about: theft of natural resources and energy, the boost of corporatization and ownership and conquest of the world, using the primary export of America, which is the military-industrial complex, and cloaking and camouflaging it as democracy, human rights, the expansion of freedom in the world. And it's the devil's slippery tongue is very, very good. And Trump is sadly, I think, falling into this with Venezuela and Israel. And again, if he's not careful, he'll be removed. And the only hope really is for him to stand up to this by artfully removing the United States from these, again, endless wars and regime change operation, which he campaigned on and which the American people supported and voted him for. Go ahead.
Don, is it true that the more things change, the more they remain the same?
Yes, it's all about the money, folks, and control. What can we say? Go back in history, come up to today. What has changed? It's all the same, man. Yeah, and Israel is we're bowing down to Israel. They seem to have the control over the United States, and they dictate what's going to happen here. Go ahead.
Thanks, Don. Meanwhile, Mike Adams has observed every liberal city in America is headed toward Venezuela. Liberal cities across America are collapsing into third world status. It's not just the fact that San Francisco streets are now littered with drug needles and human feces either. Seattle is also collapsing into rampant homelessness and drug addiction, creating an entire class of impoverished homeless residents who are breeding grounds for HIV and other infectious diseases. Yet Seattle's liberal city leaders, like all progressives, are unwilling to take any action to resolve the problems in the first place. Instead, they enact new policies that make the problems worse while calling it progress. Local reporter Eric Johnson recently released a documentary called Seattle is Dying, which I've watched, which dared to document the city's collapse into third world status. But instead of working to resolve the root of the problem, brain-dead liberal economic policies that lead to destitution and collapse, the city's elite have launched a PR campaign to brainwash local citizens with engineered happy messages that are dutifully broadcast by local news networks. As Seattle's City Journal has reported, earlier this month, linked documents revealed that a group of prominent nonprofits, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Champion Advocacy Fund, the Rakes Foundation, and Balmer Group, hired a PR firm, Pyramid Communications, to conduct polling, create messaging, and disseminate the resulting content through a network of silent partners in academia, the press, government, and the nonprofit sector. The campaign hashtag Seattle for All is a case study in what writer James Lindsay calls idea laundering, creating misinformation and legitimizing it as objective truth through repetition in sympathetic media. This propaganda campaign, of course, is exactly what the vaccine industry does on a daily basis all across America. Monsanto and the GMO industry has been pursuing the same dishonest tactics for years. First, they fabricate industry lies and pay off doctors and health experts to sign their names, industry-funded junk science. Then they issue propaganda directives to the corporate-run media, which dutifully broadcasts all their propaganda. From there, the tech giants shadow ban and deplatform anyone who opposes the official narrative. So now Seattle's wealthy elite are trying to brainwash the population into rejecting the evidence right in front of their own eyes. Seattle is rapidly turning into a whole liberal city because liberals destroy everything they control. As Charles Hughes Smith writes in his America's Forced Financial Flight, Fleeing Unaffordable and Dysfunctional Cities, although it's verboten to mention this in the We're So Fabulous local media, many of these high-cost urban regions are hopelessly dysfunctional. Taxpayers have ponied up billions of dollars in new taxes, fees, and bond measures, and yet none of the problems that make daily life miserable ever get better. The forced flight from unaffordable and dysfunctional urban regions is as yet a trickle. But watch what happens when a recession causes widespread layoffs in high-wage sectors, and suddenly the hipster bistro that was always jammed is empty and then shuttered. To replace the taxes lost to layoffs and closed businesses, a political class will have no choice but to launch a frenzy of higher taxes, fees, and surcharges on those left behind. Every liberal city headed toward a Venezuela-style collapse. This story is about much more than just Seattle. What every American needs to understand is that liberals are right now in the process of economically gutting every major U.S. city that's under their control. Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, New York City, Houston, Miami, Denver, Portland, and other liberal cities are all headed toward total economic and humanitarian disaster. Leftist policies always breed homelessness, drug addiction, disease, and starvation. In cities like Seattle, the government even pays for needles and drugs to continue supporting the substance abuse habits of local citizens. If liberals regain the White House in the future, they will do the same thing to America that they're doing right now to Seattle. Wow. Instead of solving problems, liberals would much rather portray those who suffer from the problems as victims of oppression. Yet it's the liberal democratic policies that are creating these nightmare conditions to begin with, driving people out of jobs with mandatory minimum wage hikes, for example, that also cause business owners to flee the cities and states run by liberals. Remember, left-wing societies are characterized by authoritarian, wealthy elitists who rule over the impoverished masses while destroying the middle class. That's exactly what's happening across the West Coast liberal cities today. Listen to my recent podcast, which explained more about where this is all headed. And get out of liberal cities while you can, sooner or later. They're going to start confiscating pensions and private property to fund their insane spending sprees in a desperate effort to keep buying votes from the very people they have trapped in a cycle of poverty and homelessness. Scott.
Well, you know, Jim, there's a very interesting person, Ellen Chao for mayor. She's a Chinese-American woman, and I'm putting it up there for people to see, and they can go to the website, ellenformayor2019.com. She is running for San Francisco mayor. She is a Republican, although she's running as an independent conservative because the Republicans in California have become so abysmal and Democrat-light. But Ellen Chao is a Chinese American who is getting up campaigning on the cleaning of streets of San Francisco. And she said very clearly, I am not running to be a politician. I'm here to pick up the needles and the bags of feces. I'm here to go to work, and I'm here to clean. I don't have long fingernails. I'm not a pretty Barbie doll. I'm here to go to work so that your children can walk the streets without getting their foot stuck with hepatitis C diseased needles, that homeless people don't accost and bother and traumatize your citizens, and there aren't bags of feces to spread disease. So she's running on this campaign, and she's had enormous success. And it's fascinating to see the Asians in California beginning to really rise up and carry the traditional values mantle of family, of law and order, and freedom and capitalism, because the Asians fled communism and the destruction of the communist regimes in Vietnam and China. And they came to America for sanctuary and an opportunity to flourish. And now the communist Democrats are trying to put them and their grandchildren back into the state of nouveau liberal communism under leftist policies, and they're rejecting it. They're standing up against the LGBTQ homosexual education agenda, the rabid environmental agenda, and this homeless infiltration into the cities and the sanctuary cities. So there are people rising up to reject this this policy of death that the Democrats have been doing to Seattle and San Francisco. So this is exciting because people are fighting against it. Jim?
Were I a resident of San Francisco, she'd get my vote. Don, you're out there in Seattle. You have been for decades. Tell us about the score there.
7 decades here, and boy, in the last decade, under the last couple of mayors, including the current one, things have just really gone downhill. And it's the drugs that it was initiated, and that causes people to not do things properly and lose their homes and get on the streets and go downhill from then and from there. And also, I understand that some of these homeless people end up missing, and so some of them are being somehow missing. And so
they're being disappeared, Don?
Yeah, that's the rumor around here, and it's
they're actually being kidnapped and murdered.
I can't say that, but I'm not sure what happens to them once they're gone. They're gone. How do we?
Here today, gone tomorrow. Is that cleaning up the streets of Seattle? Is there a vigilante group at work with a giant vacuum cleaner?
I wouldn't say it's vigilante. It's probably more the authorities that are coming in and essentially they can give them bad drugs and other things to make them so sick. You never can tell. And this is just out of control here. It's gone from bad to worse.
My own son resides in Seattle, so I'm very troubled about the future of the city, Don. And
yes, yeah.
That apprehension.
Go ahead.
Meanwhile, here's a ray of light. A judge rules Confederate statues are war monuments. Charlottesville. A big decision in the lawsuit over Confederate statues in downtown Charlottesville is likely bad news for the city. Charlottesville Circuit Judge Richard Moore has ruled that the statues are war monuments which are protected under state law. That likely means the city doesn't have the legal right to take them down. I'm glad for this. In his 9-page ruling, Moore cites the fact that both Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson are depicted in their military uniforms and on horses associated with their time in the Civil War. I believe that defendants have confused or conflated, 1, what the statues are with 2, the intentions or motivations of some involved in erecting them or the impact they might have on some people and how they might make some people feel today more rights, but that does not change what they are. Moore finds the issue to be so clear-cut that, quote, if the matter went to trial on this issue and a jury were to decide that they are not monuments or memorials to veterans of the Civil War, I would have to set such verdict aside as unreasonable. The lawsuit was filed after Charlottesville City Council voted to remove the statue of Lee in early 2017. City councilors Mike Siner, Kathy Galvin, and Wes Bellamy were named individually for the roles in the vote as our former councilors Bob Fenwick and Kristen Zakos. I actually wrote to Bob Fenwick about how the whole Charlottesville fiasco was a fabrication, 2 cars, 2 drivers, 2 or even 3 takes. That was a scam. He didn't show the least interest. While legal analysts have said this ruling could sink the city's defense, Moore notes that this ruling doesn't guarantee the plaintiffs will prevail. Meanwhile, in another absurdity, we're coming to see these on a daily daily events. George Washington High School considers removing mural of George Washington because it traumatizes students. George Washington High School in Northern California, surprise, surprise, is considering removing a mural of the nation's first president because critics say it traumatizes students and community members. A 13-member working group held 4 public meetings and in February concluded that the historical paintings do not include values of social justice, diversity, united, or student-centered. They recommend having the murals, which include numerous panels that make up the life of Washington, removed because it glorifies oppression instead of eliminating it, and it has nothing to do with equality or inclusion at all, because inclusion is more important to them than accuracy when it comes to history. One panel depicts Washington with African Americans and others engaged in manual labor, while another involves a scene representing manifest destiny and a dead Native American. A San Francisco mural has become the latest high-profile target of progressive history censors, writes Fergus M. Bodowich. The impact of this mural is greater than its intent ever was, the report states. It's not a counter narrative if the mural traumatizes students and community members. I mean, this is absurd beyond belief. So murals with accurate historical depictions are traumatizing? Does that mean history itself is upsetting to students? What about documentaries and historical movies? Will movies about Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson have to be banned? Pretty soon history will be forgotten. Is that what the American left wants? Trump warned us. President Trump warned almost 2 years ago that the Confederate statue outrage would eventually culminate with the removal of symbols representing our forefathers. George Washington was a slave owner, Trump conveyed to reporters. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson, the president, continued addressing the left's attempts to whitewash history? So what do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down his statue? Because he was a major slave owner, are we going to take down his statue? The answer was yes. It didn't take long to realize Trump's words were a prescient warning. Race hustler Al Sharpton, just days later, remember the Tawana Brawley fraud, called for an end to funding for the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, insisting it's an insult to my family. This guy was the father of the Constitution, for crying out loud, the author of the Declaration of Independence. An insult to his family? That same month, a Chicago pastor demanded that a statue of Washington be removed from a local park because he allegedly only fought for justice and freedom of white Americans. A couple of months after that, a church Washington attended in Virginia removed a plaque honoring the first president. Now this, what an absurdity, Scott.
Yeah, it really is. We're witnessing not only the disintegration of history and the abuse and the brainwashing, and I would say the lobotomization of young people in America, but this is the French Revolution all over again. The French Revolution were the founding fathers of communism and fascism and authoritarian rule. The French rabble being stirred up to overthrow the church and the aristocracy, to tear down the statues, to guillotine leadership, and achieve equality, fraternity, and what was it? Equality, fraternity, and
reality.
All of that is being repeated now with Antifa and the far left claiming that every statue of a Civil War general or a white-wigged founding father are somehow rapers and haters of black people, Mexican people, Asian people, every other people other than white people, and they need to be erased from the history books, and everyone who resembles them needs to be paying reparations to Al Sharpton. And really, the next step will be to enslave all of these white people, to give them a feeling and a penitence and a purgatory to experience what they themselves did not experience, but hundreds of years ago may have occurred. Well, let's go farther back than that. Let's go to ancient Egypt. And everyone who claims slavery under the ancient Egyptian pharaohs has a right to claim reparations now as well. To who? Well, we can trace that through all of the Greek Western government history. The asinine reality is this insanity is destroying the fabric of a reasonable people. It's separating the sheep and goats, of course. The conservative, rational people are separating themselves, almost like, in the biblical sense of Moses separating the people of God versus those who've been given over to their fornications and their idolatry or swallowed up by the earth. I think that's happening in America, and they're only going to get worse and worse. There is a civil war in America now. It's a smoldering one, but it is happening. And I think Donald Trump and the rest of the American people need to recognize this left is going to get very bloody very quickly, and the only defense is the right to keep and bear arms. So an executive order recognizing the American people's Second Amendment guarantees them the right to carry a firearm concealed and unconcealed to defend their lives, their liberty, their property, and their sacred honor. That's where we're entering into. But of course, we know that if leftist liberals pick a civil war, they'll be the ones gurneyed out on ambulances and put into funeral parlors because conservatives don't lose. Jim?
Scott, I think we're looking at a culturally superficial population here. These leftists have no knowledge of history. The idea of liberty, equality, fraternity would never cross their minds. They don't understand it. They are grown up on television. Their knowledge is an inch thin and a mile wide, and it's based on ignorance. This is abysmal. And the idea of destroying the United States, the greatest leaders, is a contribution to the destruction of our culture. This is a Zionist-inspired project to destroy the foundations of the United States and pit one segment against another in an ongoing internal cultural war that may culminate in a bona fide armed civil war. That won't be pretty. Don.
Yeah, well, my background says it all here. That the corporate media money is driving out free speech, and essentially we're also being censored on YouTube and everything else. It's just something else that cannot happen, but they're trying to erase history, start afresh. Everybody, no, it isn't that way. I will say the war memorials are memorials for war, and war is fighting, and that is not the way I would like to have our country be based on. I'd rather have us work with other countries instead of against them. But here we are, for what it's worth. Go ahead.
Well, those monuments are provocative because they make us think about our history and what we stand for and what the origins of the United States, where we've come from and where we're going. Meanwhile, we have a CBS News and a New York Times reporter suggesting the U.S. scrap free speech in favor of New Zealand-style censorship. How bad is this? CBS News released a propaganda segment on Monday featuring New York Times tech reporter Cecilia Kang, where they suggested the U.S. government could do an end run around the First Amendment through strict regulations in order to suppress hate speech and misinformation online. Both the CBS News host and NYT Times reporter Cecilia Kang said the U.S. should look to countries like Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and India, which do not have free speech, as models for suppressing free speech on the internet. Yeah. As I reported on November of 2018, the New York Times editorial board wrote a propaganda piece comparing right-wingers as jihadists and demanding authoritarian censorship of the internet to stop the spread of toxic ideas. New York Times last year hired virulent anti-white racist Sarah Jeong in August of 2018 as their lead technology writer and made her a member of their editorial board. Here's some of what she's written. Dumbass effing white people marking up the internet with their opinions like dogs pissing on fire hydrants. Oh man, it's kind of sick how much joy I get out of being cruel to old white men. Jeong's Twitter feed featured her attacking dumbass effing white people for marking up the internet with those opinions like dogs pissing on hydrants. Meanwhile, Louis Farrakhan, Alex Jones, other dangerous voices banned by Facebook and Instagram. Facebook announced Thursday it had designated some high-profile people, including Nation of Islam teacher Louis Farrakhan, who's notorious for anti-Semitic language. Frankly, I don't hear it. And right-wing conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, who's a provocative talker who invites our attention to serious issues we might otherwise overlook, as dangerous, and said it will be purging them from its platform. Jones and his media outlet InfoWars had previously been banned from Facebook in August of 2018, but had maintained a presence on Instagram, which is owned by Facebook. On Thursday, Jones and InfoWars will be barred from Instagram as well. Other people banned on Thursday include Paul Nealon, an anti-Semite who unsuccessfully ran for Congress in 2016 and 2018, and fringe right-wing media personalities Laura Loomer, Milo Yiannopoulos, and Paul Joseph Watson. We've always banned individuals or organizations to promote or engage in violence and hate, regardless of ideology, a Facebook spokesperson said in a statement provided to CNN Business. The process for evaluating potential violators is extensive. Is what led us to our decision to remove these accounts today. Actually, it's driven by algorithms. There aren't even any minds involved in it. A Facebook spokesman told CNN Business, the company goes through a lengthy process takes into consideration a number of factors before determining the individual to be dangerous. Yeah, the SCADL, whether they want them off. A Facebook post told the company goes through. Said such factors include whether the person or organization has ever called for violence against individuals based on race, ethnicity, or national origin. I doubt any of them have. Whether the person has been identified with a hateful ideology, hateful is anyone who speaks the truth because they hate the truth. Whether they use hate speech or slurs about their section on their social media profiles, and whether they have had pages or groups removed from Facebook for violating hate speech rules. See, they can't show that any of this is false, so they call it hate because they hate the truth. In some instances, when Facebook bans an individual organization, it also restricts others from expressing praise or support for them on its platform. The spokesperson added, the company continues to view such action as a correct approach. That policy may not apply to any or all the people banned Thursday, however. The spokesperson added Facebook will remove groups, pages, and accounts created to represent the banned individual when it knows the individuals participating in the effort. Some of the individuals designated as dangerous responded to the ban on their accounts in the brief period between the announcement of the ban and scrubbing the accounts. Loomer, for example, denied in an Instagram post she ever violated the company's terms of service. She asked people to follow her on a different platform, adding, look, you guys will probably never hear from me again. Yiannopoulos also published a final post on Instagram. Watson used Twitter, from which he's not been banned, to write, in an authoritarian society controlled by a handful of Silicon Valley giants, all dissent must be purged. Farrakhan, Jones, and Nealon did not immediately respond. Is it now a violation of Facebook policy to speak positively anywhere in public about people the site doesn't like? That appears to be exactly the situation here. Scott, your comments.
Well, there certainly seems to be grounds for a class action lawsuit against Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and Google on all of these different actions. Let's never forget that when the New Zealand event occurred, we analyzed it frame by frame, camera angle by camera angle, body by body, and we determined that no bullets were fired out of a weapon that impacted the human body in a way consistent with science and the history of how bodies react to bullets when they're hit into them from 1600 until now. So we explored and exposed that the New Zealand event was fraudulent, it was false, it was acted upon, it was dramatic, and subsequent to that, the analysis was it was an attempt to politically lobotomize the society and steal their Second Amendment right, their ability to defend themselves, although they don't have a Second Amendment necessarily. And this was a psychological operation. This was a crime. And Facebook and YouTube were aiding and abetting this crime. Therefore, they should be sued in a court of law for criminal conspiracy. But they were aiding and abetting the crime because they were shutting down the voices which were exposing the truth. And to use the concept of community guidelines as a defense for shutting down free voices is absolutely hypocritical, because community is based on truth. Truth is the foundation for relationship. Truth is the foundation of the relationship between a people and the government they create. They create a government to perform the truth and to do the truth and to protect their rights and property and honor and enforce obligation of contracts and provide for the common defense. They do not create a government to lord over people of the country like peasants. And Facebook, although a private entity, is still borderline and should be sued in a court for freedom of press violations. But I think more importantly, Jim, aiding and abetting criminal activity, because these false flag attacks, which are exposed scientifically and forensically, result in our Facebook pages and YouTube pages being suspended or canceled. My YouTube page was canceled because of my participation in demonstrating the New Zealand shooting was a hoax, and all forensic evidence points in that direction. So we're at a stage now, only the people who are shareholders and others can sue Facebook. It will go down very soon, I think, unless it doesn't about face, because again, people like this Sarah Zhang and I'm going to give her email out because I see it here on the slide on Twitter. It's Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, .Jeong, Jeong, at theverge.com, THEVERGE.com. Sarah.Jeong at theverge.com. That's what she has on her Twitter page. And for her to say dumb ass effing white people and all of these incendiary comments based on my race, and because I'm a conservative white man, somehow I'm
what virulent racism on her part, Scott.
Yeah,
Left doesn't seem to understand it's practicing racism itself.
Yes.
The left wing has become the most racist party the United States has ever seen. It's a shocking situation.
Yeah, when you point one finger at them, you're pointing three fingers back at you and the thumb at God. I mean, it's crazy.
Scott, I didn't mean to cut you off, friend.
No, I think that's it. I think that we're showing these people to be complete hypocrite racists. And someone needs to be saying to the young people, you are either a man or a woman standing on your own 2 feet, responsible for your own actions, demonstrating a sophisticated adult mentality that can make your way in the world. That doesn't mean you have a right to be successful. That doesn't mean you have a right to be loved, that you have a right to be coddled and have a safe space and have everything go your way and sunshiny skies all day for the rest of your life. That's a fantasy. That's a delusion. That's a dream. You have a duty and a responsibility to be respectful of other people and to make your world by social contracts. You do not have the government at your beck and call to be your enforcer to suppress people you disagree with. Otherwise, we're turning into a retarded society that makes mongoloid troglodytes look like Einstein. We are that far gone in so much of the population, Jim.
These are internet tyrants who don't understand the principle. I may hate every word you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. This idea of political correctness, not saying things that offend somebody, who gives a whether they'd offend somebody? That doesn't matter. We're seeking truth, justice, and it's totally un-American to be censoring anyone in their speech. Don.
That's for sure. I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore because here we have people are lying. I mean, they're lying about things, and it's just so ridiculous. But essentially, they're committing crimes and protecting the crimes that happened when they're putting down the truth and going for the falsehood and protecting the system against the people who are standing for truth. I mean, it's just bad as hell. Yeah.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Don.
Sorry about that.
We have more on this matter. Tucker Carlson on the 3rd had a brilliant critique of all of the massive censorship coming from the social media giants. As you may have heard by now, several personalities, including Alex Jones, Paul Joseph Watson, Laura Loomer, Gavin McInnes, Milo Yiannopoulos, and Louis Farrakhan were permanently deplatformed by Facebook on Thursday, with the most heavily sanctioned entity to be Alex Jones InfoWars, which had already been deplatformed last year. Like the others, Paul Joseph Watson had never broken Facebook rules, but was an associate of Alex Jones and InfoWars and was deemed guilty by association. Like him, you too can now be banned from Facebook by sharing too many stories from the InfoWars website. What was really sick is that the usual suspect far-left outlets like BuzzFeed, in full coordination with Facebook, published their stories about this mass deplatforming before many of the deplatformees were even aware they'd been deplatformed. The entire move was actually rolled out as a celebratory publicity stunt. CNN's Nicaragua-born never-Trumper Republican Ana Navarro was ready to go Thursday afternoon on ABC's The View, cheerleading Facebook and commenting about the deplatformees. I want them shut down. I want them silenced. I want them muted. I think they're horrible for our society. What society is she talking about? Freedom of speech is essential to American society. She can go back where she came from, for God's sake.
Right.
Indeed, it appears the globalist engine known as Silicon Valley is proceeding at a fast clip with their Chinese-style social credit form of political and behavioral control. They're acting like Hillary Clinton had won the 2016 election. The upside is a fertile discussion now unfolding with mathematician Kathy Neilheisen tweeting to remind us that U.S. tax dollars funded the precursor to Facebook, known as DARPA's LifeLog project, and that the American people are technically the owners of its research and development. She asks, how is this gifted to Zuck and Jack? How dare those platforms limit speech when the U.S. taxpayers funded the research and development? For his part, President Trump issued multiple tweets deploring the banning and the demonetization of several internet personalities in recent years, saying, I am continuing to monitor the censorship of American citizens on social media platforms. This is the United States of America. We have what's known as freedom of speech. We are monitoring and watching closely. To which Paul Joseph Watson responded pithily, thank you, Mr. President. Now, hopefully, Facebook will be stripped of its immunity under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, because it's clearly acting as a partisan publisher and not a platform. This is election meddling. Watson is referring to Section 230 tucked inside a 1996 law that attempted to regulate pornography. Section 230 is also known as the Internet Freedom and Family Empowerment Act, which states in part, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. In other words, this section immunizes both ISPs and internet users from liability for torts committed by others using their website on or online form, even if the provider fails to take action after receiving actual notice of the harmful or offensive content. In other words, there is no U.S. law forcing these big tech behemoths to impinge on the law of the land, that being the First Amendment. These tech giant censorship initiatives are purely extrajudicial. Their actions, therefore, make them publishers and not the public square type platforms they claim to be. And as publishers, they would be subject to an altogether different set of laws, including copyright infringement, which alone, if enforced, could shut down all social media instantly. Trump attacking social media companies after the Facebook bans. Trump, who tweeted and retweeted complaints Friday and Saturday, said he would monitor the censorship of American citizens. The president's comments came after Facebook this week banned Louis Farrakhan, Alex Jones, and other extremists. Facebook move signaled renewed efforts by the social media giant to remove people and groups they don't like, promoting objectionable material such as hate, racism, and anti-Semitism. That's a cover, that's a cloak. The company said it's always banned people or groups. On Twitter, Trump cited a number of individuals who said were being unfairly tweeted by social media, including Watson and actor James Woods. He insisted it was getting worse and worse for conservatives on social media. He's got that right. Scott.
Yeah, I think we're witnessing the rise of the social media, and Tucker Carlson is at the forefront of speaking truth. He is the most intelligent voice on Fox News because he's a thinking, analytical, reasonable person. He was at Heritage Foundation and elsewhere, and I think he is drawing attention, and the president is listening because President Trump has tweeted about Paul Joseph Watson and others being victimized by this depraved fascist left-wing media Silicon Valley that is, I think, could be a flash in the pan. People are looking for ways to separate themselves from the media saturation and the insidious theft of personal habits and personal information and personal intelligence that people have unwittingly surrendered to Facebook. All of that is being used against people, and I think it's cultivating a backlash and a rejection and a search for a reason to chastise and separate from these Silicon Valley companies. So when Tucker Carlson's up there and he's identifying these conservative voices that are not speaking for 1935 fascist Germany or for Stalin or for the Ku Klux Klan or any of this nonsense, but conservative voices that are arguing for freedom of individual rights and their right to live their lives without government oppression and the right to keep and bear arms and the right to have a functioning civil society and the right not to have children forcibly unvaccinated, or the right to live life without oppressive taxes and all sorts of other restraints, and the right to live in a state free from sanctuary city invasion, which is a violation of the Supremacy Clause and Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution, which California now is in a blatant separation civil war, where you have a new California emerging because California has turned into a sanctuary state, which is a violation of the Constitution. It's a violation of people's right to be free from invasion, and that's what Gavin Newsom and the California government is betraying. They're bringing in invaders and calling them sanctuary state refugees, and they're dissolving and destroying people's rights under the Constitution to be protected. They're also destroying the Supremacy Clause, where the federal government is responsible for the immigration and naturalization of the borders of the United States. So we're witnessing a media that is, I think, like an iceberg slowly melting in the warm water of truth. Jim?
I think they've gone a bridge too far, Scott. I think they've gone way too far, and everyone sees what's going on, and with a great alarm. Don, would you like to add a comment?
Well, I just amen to that. Did you get slide 66 on there? I didn't think I saw that one. That's an important one. Every nation on earth must declare war against big tech, and I think that's about right. That's where we're at right now. Truth versus lies. That's it. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Don. Right. There was one more slide here. Mike Adams declaring every nation on earth must declare war against big tech. A call to action. Mike Adams is spot on. He knows what he's talking about. I'm glad you reminded me about that further slide, Don. Thank you for that. Meanwhile, DePaul University faculty joins in on anti-Jew attacks. There's a great deal of exaggerated reporting about alleged anti-Semitism, which doesn't appear to add up at all. Last Thursday, the New York Times International Edition published a cartoon, allegedly, that could have been published by the Nazi propaganda machine Die Stürmer in 1936. It depicted a blind Orthodox Jewish President Donald Trump being led by a C9 dog, with the face of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Netanyahu dog was wearing a collar with a Star of David. Last Saturday, after publishing a Nazi-like screed that could have appeared under the New York Times cartoon in Die Stürmer, white nationalist John Earnest opened fire on Jews at the Chuppah House in Podaway. But those both appear to be fake and fabricated, and not to be anti-Semitic at all. This whole story in San Diego is another fake. Then on Wednesday, DePaul University faculty voted overwhelmingly to censure philosophy professor Jason Hill for publishing an opinion article at the Federalist defending Israel and Jewish rights, and calling for Israel to annex Judea and Samaria. Hill's censure is notable for what it tells us about the nature of anti-Semitism on college campuses in America today. Well, look at this cartoon. This is supposed to be anti-Semitic. But it's anti-Israel, it's anti-Zionist, it's anti-Netanyahu, and it's properly faulting Trump for adopting a foreign policy that appears to be dictated by Bibi Netanyahu, including declaring Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel, giving the Golan Heights to Israel, declaring that the Revolutionary Guard of Iran is a terrorist organization. I mean, that's all completely outrageous behavior of Trump, and it does appear this cartoon captures exactly that notion. Meanwhile, they have an Israeli envoy calling for criminalization of anti-Semitism after the cartoon. I mean, get that. The only way to stop anti-Semitism is to criminalize it. This is the arrogant attitude of the Talmudic Jews who believe they are superior to every other race which only exists to serve them. They believe they can lie and cheat and steal and even murder non-Jews at Goyim with impunity. Meanwhile, is it going to be anti-Semitic to report that a Jewish Auschwitz survivor admits he lied about everything? Joseph Hertz said he fabricated the story of being sent to camp and meeting Nazi Dr. Joseph Mengele to keep memories alive about the history of the Holocaust. A Pennsylvania man who claimed for years to have escaped from Auschwitz met track and field star Jesse Owens, and Nazi Dr. Joseph Mengele confessed on Friday he fabricated the whole story. I'm writing today to apologize publicly for harm caused to anyone because of my inserting myself into the description of life in Auschwitz. Joseph Hertz, 86, wrote in a letter to his local paper, I was not a prisoner there. I did not intend to lessen or overshadow the events that truly happened there by falsely claiming to have been personally involved. I was wrong. I asked forgiveness. I determined at that moment to do everything in my power to prevent the loss of the truth about wartime life and death at Auschwitz. Except there was a British soccer team at Auschwitz. Everything we've been told about Auschwitz is a pack of lies. This is embarrassingly bad. For years, Hurt gave public speeches at schools around the U.S. about his experience in the Second World War, including his Jewish family's flight from Poland to Belgrade. He also told people he was arrested by the Nazis, sent to the concentration camp at Auschwitz, and met Mengele, the SS physician who tortured prisoners at the concentration camp. He claimed to have escaped under an electric fence. This is embarrassingly bad, Scott, embarrassingly bad. It seems it only gets worse. And we had this case in Winnipeg we discussed last week, where they had fabricated an alleged anti-Semitic attack on their restaurant that they themselves had perpetrated. How outrageous can it get?
Yeah, they lose all credibility when you have one Jewish person claiming to be Jewish going up and painting stars or swastikas on gravestones or on the side of buildings, and it's they themselves who's doing it to trigger this emotional guilt trip. And you've also had Israeli politicians say the Holocaust card and anti-Semitic card are all tricks that we play on people to, again, emotionally traumatize them and guilt trip them into submitting to this, whatever the agenda is at the time. And it's always unhealthy and destruction. The entire liberal Jewish Zionist, however you want to call it, impulse from the 1960s up, and the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center, saying that mentally challenged or deranged people shouldn't be institutionalized, they should be released on the street. Well, that's caused the San Francisco and Seattle problems and the chaos of that. And all of the LGBTQRS, homosexual teaching of the curriculum of the schools, all of that has been very poisonous. And now we get into the juggernaut of military conquest, and Israel leading the president, George Bush, and then Obama, and now Trump, into this continued escalation of conflict with all of the Middle Eastern regimes so that Israel can establish its geopolitical expansion and Greater Israel Project. These are facts. These are observable incidents that need to be debated in the public opinion, and I think judged as uncharacteristic of Americans and the Constitution. That's why they have a right to boycott Israel. And that's why, there should be similar cartoons showing Netanyahu firing rockets and doing helicopter and plane bombings and disintegrating buildings because kids are firing rocks at slingshots over a fence to territories that they were expelled from. That's something entirely different than being an anti-Jewish, Israel, anti-Semitic person. That doesn't exist. And I think you've exposed a lot, Jim, on the revelations of Auschwitz and the entire Holocaust as being fraudulent. It's been a regurgitation of the classic numerology, which they've used from 1900 onward. And what we've seen in America over the past 50 years since the invention of television has been a constant attempt to brainwash Americans into believing a fable that does not in reality resemble the truth. Jim?
Yes. Don, would you like to add a comment?
Yeah, we've all been programmed, and I understand that President Trump is doing one thing that I like, that he's put an executive order to take the federal government out of education and take it back to the states and local places so that we won't be indoctrinated so much by all the federal bureaucracy, that agenda, the programming that they're doing, which is very effective. And of course, they're doing it now through the cell phones and things. So everywhere you go, you can't escape it. You have been programmed. We're 35 years beyond 1984 now, and it's really having an effect on the mind and psyche and health of everybody who's walking this earth. Bye.
Thanks, Don. And of course, that cartoon wasn't even anti-Semitic, so you got the Israeli envoy to the UN declaring we got to outlaw anti-Semitism. How absurd is that? Meanwhile, the NRA has been engaged in a lot of infighting. Ollie North had no business becoming president of the NRA. This has led to a considerable internal differences where Wayne LaPierre has prevailed, perfectly appropriate. Within the context of NRA CEO Slam's offer I couldn't refuse from NRA President LaPierre versus North has been fought out among NRA officials. Wayne Pierre says he was recently made an offer I couldn't refuse, but I refused it. Per the Wall Street Journal, the CEO and executive vice president of the National Rifle Association delivered a stunning letter to the NRA's board Thursday, one that revealed what LaPierre says is a threat meant to intimidate and divide us. That threat, he alleges, was an attempt by NRA President Oliver North, along with Ackerman McQueen, one of the association's vendor, to force LaPierre to step down from his role with a group or face destructive allegations made against him and the NRA. In his letter, LaPierre contends North called one of his senior staff members on Wednesday and said that Ackerman McQueen had a letter on the ready that would be bad for LaPierre, the NRA, and two members of LaPierre's executive team. Ollie North is a rat. The fact that he's a former Marine Corps officer no longer counts with me. He has disgraced himself. This is completely outrageous. Not surprisingly, North lost this battle as the NRA ousted President Oliver North after an alleged extortion scheme against Chief Executive. NRA Association President Oliver North has been ousted after an alleged extortion scheme within the group's highest-ranking officials came to light on Friday. In a statement, North told the organization he was informed he would not be nominated for a re-election. North's term end Monday. This is really a good solution to a bad problem. He had no business being there. Meanwhile, bear in mind, not only is it the case that the cities the liberals control are decaying and dying on the vine, but they're also the sources of the most high murder rates in the country because of their gun control policies, which promote free fire zones for criminals who aren't going to give up their guns. You would have thought Chicago taught us something. It's embarrassingly bad, the correlation of the murder distribution with the Electoral College map, where Democrats are in control, guns are few, murders are high, and of course, feces are abundant. It's embarrassingly bad. A former CIA officer has warned us, arm yourself, violence by the left will worsen in the next 20 years. Joe Biggs wrote, so basically, Representative Swalwell wants a war because that's what you would get. You're out of your effing mind if you think I'll give up my rights and give the government all the power. Swalwell responded, and it would be a short war, my friend. The government has nukes, too many of them. That's his idea. Use the military to confiscate the guns of the people, and if there's resistance, nuke them. This guy is insane. Of course, he's from California. Meanwhile, any study of gun violence should include how guns save lives. It turns out that there was a study by the CDC about the defensive use of guns, which is a common occurrence. Almost all national survey estimates indicate that defensive gun uses by victims are at least as common as offensive uses by criminals, with estimates of annual uses ranging about 500,000 to more than 3 million. In the context of about 300,000 violent crimes involving firearms. This was in 2008. Another study estimated there are 1,029,600 defensive gun uses per year for self-protection and for the protection of property at home, work, and elsewhere, excluding military service, police work, or work as security guards, yielding an estimate of 162,000 cases per year where someone almost certainly would have been killed if they'd not had a gun for protection. Take that, you liberal gun grabbers. 162,000 cases per year where someone almost certainly would have been killed had they not had a gun to use for protection. In comparison, there were 11,208 homicide deaths by firearm in 2012, a total of 33,626 deaths due to injury by firearms, but the vast majority, over 21,000, were suicides. The value of firearms in the hands of law-abiding citizens should not be measured in terms of lives saved or crimes should be measured in terms of lives saved or crimes prevented, not criminals killed. This is a massive issue for us to confront. Scott.
Well, I think Don's earlier comment is perfectly appropriate here. And I think Candace Owens, the black female who has been a champion of conservative truth, is probably the best voice the NRA could have. And they should have her as one of the stars, because Candace Owens, a young black female, is probably one of the people most in need of a gun to be able to provide and defend herself from both the Antifa far left attackers as well as a young woman in general. A young black woman in general is in need of a gun to defend themselves in their home. So Candace Owens would be an excellent substitute for Oliver North. And I don't think Oliver North really has any credibility. Anyone who remembers the Iran-Contra scandal and the misdirection of funds and the entire episode in Central America, Oliver North was a key player in. And this is just another sign. And I know Kevin Shipp, CIA guy who was commenting on this. I knew him, and I talked to him at a conference I was at in Dallas. And he is right on the money. And we've been saying this too, haven't we, Jim, that there's a civil war in the country. It'll only get worse. The left will go more and more insane. We see them already lighting themselves on fire. We see them defecating in the streets, turning cars over, pounding on the doors of the Supreme Court because of Kavanaugh. And they will only more and more devolve into the beasts that they are. And I think Kevin Shipp's right on the money. Jim?
I think so too. Don, did you want to contribute?
No, carry on. Let's go to Sandy Hook.
Well, it's stunning, the ignorance that we see about the relationship between guns and homicides, where the more guns, the fewer homicides, the fewer guns, the more homicides, a worldwide pattern. Meanwhile, the Sandy Hook Posner versus Fetzer lawsuit, the defendant's motion for summary judgment, which I submitted on the 30th. Alex Jones may have taken a fall, but back in 2015, Star Wars reporting that Nobody Died at Sandy Hook had been banned by Amazon.com after having been on sale less than a month and selling nearly 500 copies. Given what we have learned in the meanwhile about the man who calls himself Lenny Posner and his Honor Network, it would not surprise me if Honor had played a role in getting the book banned. He has boasted of taking down tens of thousands of content items from the internet, where the book would count as only one. It was designed destined to be a bestseller, which a deep state could not afford. It thus appears one or more of its assets was deployed to contain the threat. Meanwhile, we have a powerful case for the motion for summary judgment, including the following facts about the two death certificates. Exhibit A was attached to the complaint, which is supposed to be a state-certified death certificate. Exhibit B was given to Kelly Watt by Lenny Posner. I have described Exhibit B as a fabrication, a fake, a forgery in many places. I had never before seen Exhibit A prior to being served with the suit. Both violate Connecticut law, however, meaning both are fabrications. Because Exhibit B is uncertified, it is a fake. Exhibit B says no autopsy was performed yet. Plaintiff has submitted an autopsy report to the court. The 26 December 2012 date of the town registrar's receipt of the death certificate on both Exhibit A and Exhibit B is not legally compliant, meaning the child was buried without a permit and that both death certificates are fake. The time of death of 11 a.m. does not comport with the official narrative of the shooting taking place between 9:30 and 9:40, and no declaration was made at that time or ever. That the official account or the plaintiff is claiming that EMTs pronounced death, but no EMTs were allowed into the building. Exhibit A itself, the state certified, isn't a certified copy since it's illegible and bears no raised seal. Both exhibits display typographical inconsistency, suggesting they're both fake, that they were typed on different typewriters. I have a great deal of experience. My first book, a 500-page manuscript, I typed consecutively from the first page to the last using a typewriter. I know a great deal about typewriters. This was a fake. The argument we presented include the following key elements. My statements describing the death certificate as a fabrication were substantially true, where you're allowed to have minor variations, but if your statements are substantially true, so the claim of defamation cannot stand. In fact, truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Second, I made no statement about Exhibit A, the state certified death certificate, so which means I never published any statements about it for defamation. You must be making false statements that you knew to be false if you're dealing with a public figure, but you made them anyway, and you must publish those, but I never published any statements about a death certificate I'd never seen before. Defendant statements, moreover, are privileged under the First Amendment since the plaintiff is a limited purpose public figure. He's inserted himself. He's become the face of Sandy Hook. He's made massive amounts of money. He's using his honor network to take down discussions. A woman by the name of Sarah Westall, who has a background in the news, who still cares about the news, has done a two-part interview with me and now published an introduction to the interview on YouTube. Truth, First Victim of War, Sandy Hook, Fetzer versus Posner, Redefining Free Speech. She got the right order because it's a plaintiff whose name comes first. Posner versus Fetzer, Sandy Hook case that could destroy our First Amendment right on BitChute, 1 of 2. Posner versus Fetzer, Sandy Hook case that could destroy our First Amendment rights, 2nd on BitChute again. Meanwhile, we have a brilliant piece by Richard Dolan, The Big Picture, about managing conspiracy theories, tracing the history of the CIA's involvement and how they've used the phrase to denigrate anyone who's reporting the truth about false flag attacks or other events where the government doesn't want the public to know the truth, all substantiated by the research where I've been editing books and bringing together experts on each of these cases to appear at moonrockbooks.com, so you'd have a conspiracy catalog, a compendium of research about what really happened, including about Sandy Hook, about the Boston bombing, about Orlando and Dallas, about Charlottesville, about Parkland, more to come, about JFK, several about 9/11, and the role of the internet in exposing what's going on and why the deep state is so panic-stricken about it and having now to react so harshly to constrain it by means of massive censorship. Scott.
Go ahead.
Well, the Sandy Hook is a particularly heinous false flag because, of course, it's another New Zealand mosque shooting all over again, except it's in the school. It's claiming to have killed little children in kindergarten by, a lone gunman. And all of that is coming out increasingly false, and the evidence doesn't stand, and your death certificate has been exposed as false, Jim. And they've picked a fight with you, and you've gone in, and they didn't know what was coming, and now you're causing all the drawers to be opened, all the tables to be overturned, every piece of evidence, every fact, every video, every statement, every photograph to be investigated sua sponte by the court to determine, has fraud been perpetrated upon the court, has deceit been perpetrated upon the court, and thereby the American public. The courts were designed to protect people's rights, including the Second Amendment and the First Amendment, and you've been advocating for both. So the court needs to come down very, very hard on Posner and should sua sponte criminally investigate him for massive fraud, financial fraud, racketeering, conspiring to defraud the American public and violate their constitutional rights, 18 U.S.C. 242, as well as 42 U.S.C. 1985 should be applied. There should be a federal investigation under Trump. There should be a whole special unit assigned to the Sandy Hook fraud and everything that was designed to, under Obama, create a climate of gun confiscation that would essentially put the American public into a submissive, fetal position of slavery. And that fantasy is going to destroy those perpetrators of it. And I think your case is the shot heard around the world, Jim.
And Scott, the irony of it is I was stewing, trying to figure out how I could ever get all the evidence I had into a court of law. He served it up to me on a silver platter. I could not have been more grateful. It has
Ask and ye shall receive.
The process server told me she'd never seen anyone so happy to be served with a lawsuit. Don, I know you want to have some comments, and perhaps we've reached the time with our break.
I think that we've reached the time, and I will say that where can you have a crisis where everybody must check in? That's the way we have a FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Act.
It says right in the FEMA manual, everyone must check in with a controller when they arrive. All the players were identified with name tags, color-coded name tags on lanyards. You got it right, Don.
That's the way you have to have a managed crisis. Well, that's about it for today, folks. This is Truth versus News for May 6th. Wow, what a show. And we'll look forward to next week, and hopefully the world will still be here. It seems like it's falling apart, but we're holding it together with the truth. And watch out for what's happening in around Iran. Okay, I got to get going here. So thank you ever so much for watching, folks. Bye now.